town. So again, welcome. This is the Locally Administered Projects Program. My name is John Rideout, and we will be getting into, let's get this started, our overview and introductions first and foremost. My name is John Rideout again. I am a transportation planner with the French Broad FRBMPO, as well as somebody who's been working with the Locally Administered Projects Program for about the last year now. We have representatives from NCDOT as well as our local divisions and Federal Highway. So if y'all wish, we can go ahead and let them do their introductions if that's okay.
Hi, everyone. This is Marta Matthews, local programs manager in Raleigh.
Hi, this is Madeline Raleigh. I work with the local programs office, transportation consultant, and I work with divisions 8 through 14.
This is Craig Coates. I'm the division project manager here in Division 13.
I'm Keith Beefy Rogers. I'm the project manager in Division 14.
Hey everybody, I'm Tammy Richards with the Federal Highway Administration. I'm the local programs, the local projects manager.
Hey everyone, this is Mike Dawson. I'm the realty officer with Federal Highway Administration. Also with me today is my dog Edna, who's sitting in the front window barking at somebody walking up the street, so I apologize for that. Anyway, I am the realty officer with Federal Highway Administration. I also serve as a transportation planner with the division office here in Raleigh.
Okay, fantastic. And a big shout out to those who are going to be assisting with their presentations in the various sections. I'm going to kick things off, and as we kind of go through our speakers, I'll just keep a hold of the presentation. You can just let me know and I'll try to anticipate moving forward. So let's start off. First, just to make sure it's abundantly clear to everybody within the NPOs that we currently have our call for projects. So this is what you're here for. And we want to make sure that everybody's aware that materials and applications are available online. You can also reach out to the NPO directly as well for any additional questions. We do want to make an important note that unlike previous cycles, this is going to be for fiscal years further out than our normal. So this call of projects is looking at fiscal year 27 and fiscal year 28. And we want to make a note that there will be just under $14 million available. $11 million of those would be through Surface Transportation Block Grant funds, and then just under $3 million for the transportation alternatives. So again, why are we here today? One, projects are now open. Hint. Next, we also want to know that these funds, this funding opportunity does have its kind of unique requirements. As much as I would love to be able to be the person who hands out lots of fat stacks of money to everybody with good ideas, that's not quite how it works. And so we just want to give both those who are potentially new applicants kind of a refresh, or give those who are new applicants an idea of kind of the requirements that you'll be getting into by applying for these funds, as well as previous applicants to kind of give them both a refresher of what needs to be. And we're also covering that if anybody's a current manager of existing LAP projects, that this can kind of serve to reinforce kind of those steps and make sure that we are covering everything in the big picture. So one of the big important things is that applying through these funds, the local government or NCDOT division, you are looking to be sponsoring this program. The sponsor is required to meet both federal and state reporting requirements, as well as to potentially front all the initial costs. This is a reimbursement process. So as you get your LAP projects up, going, and functioning, keep in mind that you will need to keep records and then apply for reimbursement. In addition to kind of the financial requirements, there are interlocal agreements required between the local entities and NCDOT. And finally, another one that's kind of becoming a little bit more important, at least from the MPO perspective, is that we are requiring reporting to the MPO board as far as the progress and status of LAP projects. And this can actually be done in a lot of different ways. One, it can be a simple email from me saying, hey, let me know of an update. You can invite me to kind of the various meetings that you have during the process, and I'll just sit quietly, take little notes, and I won't even have to bug you for an email. Or I can kind of just try to hunt you down at some other point in time to get those updates. So give you an idea that this is going to be kind of a big item. So what is LAP? Well, the locally administered project program consists of all projects eligible for federal highway surface transportation block grant programs directly attributable. It's a long, that's the reason why we always use the STB. Wow, I messed up that one. Always use the acronym that I am always going to get wrong. You can call me out on that every single time. SCBGDA funds, and whew, can never get that one. These block grant programs, previously known as STP funds, which that's kind of what I'm more used to, but are directly sent to the MPOs to distribute for those in a population of over 200,000 individuals. So this would be the fringe program PO. This funding may be used for both state and local entities, particularly revolving around transportation projects. That's going to be kind of a key requirement there. But it covers a lot. These are very flexible in their nature. So bridges, tunnels, pedestrians, bike infrastructure, transit capital. There's a lot of things that kind of fall that are eligible. In addition to the STBGDA funds, you have TAP funds. And these are kind of more of a smaller set aside for bike, pedestrian infrastructure kind of items. And just to focus on this is that both of these funding sources are competitive. So that's the reason why we have the call for projects and applications, is because it is a limited set of funds that are available, but it's competitive within the region. So entities are kind of somewhat competing against each other. So one of the ways that I always like to try to remind folks to think about this during the application process is think of a rectangle and a square for these types of funding sources. Anything that's TAP DA eligible is eligible for STBGDA funds. So anything that is the bicycle improvements, environmental mitigation, rails to trails, those types of things can also apply for the same STBGDA funds. And there's this little bit of a scoring methodology difference, but that is something always to keep in mind, because most of our projects that we fund through this region are actually more bicycle and pedestrian oriented. But on the STBGDA funds, I mean, it really becomes fairly broad as long as it's serving kind of that transportation focus. So what has been funded in this region? Well, a lot. Everything from transportation plans to the Acoustic Trail. So we do a lot, and this list is always kind of growing. What we always kind of focus on is that we're probably looking a little bit more towards construction ready projects, not necessarily that we are not considering PE right away or studies, but that's always something that probably keeps coming into more and more of a focus, is that to push things that are ready for construction, but not discounting anything else. So where are we in the current process? Well, we're currently on step 2 of these beginning steps, and this is what we'll walk you through. So right now we're in that call for projects and the information training session. Once the call for projects is done, applications are submitted, We will use our scoring methodology as well as input from the board and TCC to approve the projects and eventually program the projects and generate a tip or step ID for them. But this is just the steps for being awarded. When we step out, we have a lot to get to that final itty bitty little box at the far bottom that is project completion and maintenance. So we are actually going to walk through all of these steps today, but just to give an idea of, hey, this is kind of a very much a long-term commitment to seeing a project through to construction. So yay, scoring updates. As I mentioned earlier, there have been updates to the scoring methodology. So the previous scoring methodology was last adopted in 2016. If you have applied in the previous cycles, please be aware that our scoring methodology has changed. And particularly what the changes are pertaining to is that in previous iterations, we've had a 20 or 10 point split based on population. It was previously called geographic distribution. We kind of recognized that that wasn't a accurate label of the scoring methodology, so we amended this. So currently we have a scoring methodology that awards 10 points to local jurisdictions with a population under 20,000. And then jurisdictions with more than 20,000 are awarded 5 points in their application process. During the feedback on amending our scoring methodology, we still wanted to have a metric that was geographic distribution, but we were cognizant that we really did not have an adequate metric for scoring that. However, we did realize that our local priority points that were in previous rounds gave an entity 10 points to distribute as they saw fit to any projects that they were giving was actually more of our geographic equity question topic. So in this round, the points have been changed. Previous rounds, it was 10 points and you could split those 10 points however you want to. If you're applying for 10 projects, you had 10 points, everything got 1 point. If you are submitting 2 projects, you could split it 5-5, 9-1, 7-3, and we decided to simplify that because it was kind of creating a little bit of a disruption to kind of adequately scoring and judging the criteria. So what we really want to know, particularly in projects going forward, what is the greatest priority? So jurisdictions are going to be requested to tell us what our top 2 priorities are, and they will be giving a larger allotment of points, 20 points for their top priority, 10 points for their second priority, and 5 points for all other projects. This will also allow us to have greater geographic equity and for multiple jurisdictions applying for this, so that everybody has kind of those 1-2 important projects that they definitely want to get funded or be competitive, and this allows the MPO to kind of let jurisdictions pick which projects mean the most to them. So that stops things from being always split 3-3-3 or 1-1-1 across the board. So those are the important differences in scoring methodology. And I apologize, I forget one important clarification for this. This is for roadway, intersection, and bike ped projects only for STBGDA funds. The transit scoring methodology and the TAP DA scoring methodology has not changed. So, well, actually, sorry, TAP DA has changed, but the transit scoring metric has not changed. My apologies there. If anybody's confused, feel free to follow up. So those are the changes. So, however, everything is remaining the same. The local match scoring methodology will remain the same for the application project. So the more an entity increases their local match, the more points that are awarded. And I should clarify, this is for, again, roadway, intersection, and bike ped. If these projects are in the MTP or plan compliant, depending on if it's roadway or bike ped project, it can be awarded up to 10 or 5 points, depending on its horizon score. And there is some differences between whether or not a project is a roadway or a bike ped project. Construction methodology will remain the same. So if you're in construction projects, again, this is what I was coming back to. There's a little bit of a construction lean in some of this. So there are points awarded for construction projects versus those in the NEPA project design phase or feasibility studies. If a project has been previously funded in any capacity through the locally administered projects program, then there's also 5 points available there. Finally, you have mode effectiveness and bicycle pedestrian effectiveness, as well as cost effectiveness. There's a bigger breakdown of how these are calculated in the application packet. If you have particular follow-up questions for these, I figured that the equations are there. It's a lot easier than for me to garble up the various equations, reading them out. But again, it comes back down. If it's a roadway project, there's up to 20 points available here. If it's a bike ped project, there's up to 25 points available here. And they are based on kind of a equation metric in these categories that you see here. Again, back to TAP programs. Again, the local and geographic equity points, that is what's changing. But they've kind of fallen in a similar way, but in mode effectiveness, there's actually up to 30 points available, but the rest of the scoring metrics remain the same. So kind of previous to what I discussed earlier. And finally, with transit projects and alternative fuel projects, they use a different scoring methodology. We have the geographic equity here because again, 40 points for those for under 20,000, we still call it that, and then 30 points for those with greater. But we also have a service connectivity that for transit that can be up to 40 points available. So, and that really focuses on making regional connections. So those that are crossing county lines are going to score higher. For alternative fuel projects, you have 40 points available. In addition, there is a cost effectiveness metric that would be scaled at 20 points. So again, there's actually, for a lot of transit projects, folks kind of look at it and see very big chunks of points available. And there is some competitive advantage there for those. So it's a little bit easier. It's a lot less equations on the French Broad River NPO staff to go through the cost through some things, but it's fairly direct on that. And that should round out the scoring changes. I know that was real fast and quick for everybody available. If folks want to have a deeper dive into the scoring methodology, because I know that's always important for any entity applying for a project. If you have any questions, please reach out to me at john@landofsky.org or through the NPO. We'll be more than happy to help. But that was just a really fast update to kind of get through that transition from that first box in the steps to that third box in the step. So from that, I am going to turn it over. So I appreciate it. Madeline, I think this is you.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Madeline Raleigh again with the Local Programs Office. I'm just going to review briefly the Enterprise Business System, or what we call the EBS portal. Next slide, please. Okay, so we have, again, this is the EBS portal, and this is a platform that we use that allows the local government agencies to interact with their projects and NCDOT for project delivery. So this system is used by different programs within NCDOT. So if you are new and you don't have access to the local programs office section, please know that there are these other programs are PAL Bill, Governor's Highway Safety Program, the Public Transportation Division, which is now the Integrated Mobility Division. They have bike ped planning grants, and each of the roles within these programs are different, and they're based on the security forms that are submitted from local government agencies. So if you do not have access to the EBS portal, you'll have to submit a form for access to the portal. And that's what you see in this image here. This form can be found on the Connect website for NCDOT. Each user needs to have an ID and a password in order to get on. So you would submit this application that you have, we give you access, and then you would move forward with that. So, so one thing I did want to say is if you were new, as a local government agency, you can have more than one person who has access to the EBS portal. You know, maybe there's someone in financing, maybe there's someone who is doing the project management. So you can have more than one person in. However, if you're a small community, sometimes we see this, you can't have a consultant that is outside of the local government agency. We cannot grant them access at this time. So just be aware of that. If you have questions, you can just call us and we can give you more information. Next slide, please. So once you do have access to the local government, or we call it the LPMO system, or again, the enterprise business system, more frequently we call it the EBS portal. So once you come on, the first page that you will see when you're logging on is where you see the government seal, and then where you put in your ID and your password. So you put that in, and the next page will pop up will be this one where you see it says pot. Can you go back just one slide, please? Once you put in your ID and your password, this next screen will pop up. It'll be this blue, and it'll have these what we call apps on them, these little square items. Once you select that, it will pop up the next page, and you can flip to the next slide, please. Okay, so when you are logged on, this is going to be the menu or the home screen that the local government agency will see. And it is slightly different now. We've tried to make it a little bit more intuitive, but it basically looks the same, has the same function, and you'll do the same things you would otherwise with this. So, but this screenshot is, again, it's our main menu. And when you have access, this is what's going to pop up. And just to give you some background, this system was developed to help the local government agencies to follow a consistent path when administering local projects. And the local government agency will use the system to request agreements, upload documents for review, request their funding authorization, and request reimbursements. The system will contain all of the documents related to the project, and the advantages of local government agency to the local government agency will be that they don't have to figure out when they're submitting documents who needs to receive what. We'll coordinate that on our end, so they just need to upload the documents. And as a reminder, this system doesn't change any of the requirements for the federal aid project delivery. It's designed to simplify the logistics of going through the whole process of project delivery. It also gives more control to the local government agency to initiate their requests and manage their project delivery. Next slide, please. So once you do, again, have access to the system, you'll be ready to start an agreement. And prior to starting that agreement, you'll make sure that your project has been programmed within the NCDOT STIP. And if you're unsure about that, we're here. We can help you with any of these things moving forward. But you're going to go into the system, and you're going to submit a new application for the agreement. And an application form will be similar to what the some of us already are familiar with, the project information data sheets. And it's similar, and you'll complete it. You'll have information to fill in. And once that's filled in and you hit the submit button, it will begin the process for us to initiate that agreement. Okay, and just to show, like in that second previous bullet, it says the application is the agreement. This is, you'll put your information in regarding your scope, your funding, and your scheduling of your project. Next slide, please. So the next thing is, this is view agreement, submit documents. This is, and you'll see in the right corner, you'll see where the red arrow is. On your, from your menu screen, you will select this for submitting your documents, as it says, and viewing the information about your project. So the local government agencies should submit all their documents for review by the department through the, we call it also the local project system. And the EBS portal, again, it's that repository of all this information related to your project. And it can be accessed by everybody within the DOT and also the local government agency. So we all can see those documents, and they're easy to find if you're looking for them for any particular purpose. But when you're, this last bullet here, we want to emphasize that there is a difference between attaching documents and submitting documents. When you're in this view agreement, submit documents, sometimes we see that the local governments will just go in and attach documents inside that portion of the that page. And so we don't want you to do that. You'll see as you go along that we have what we call activities to submit, and each documents will be submitted under particular activities within the whole system. Okay, you can go to the next slide, please. And just another word on when we're saying submitting documents, just as a note, when you submit documents, there's usually a button or something to select to submit them specifically, and those are what create workflows back to the DOT. So a lot of times we see that someone submitting information forgets to actually hit submit button, and it just sits there on their end, so to speak. So just a word that there's a there's a difference. So now I want to talk a little bit about the change request. So this is one of the activities in the system and under the menu that you see at the right. So there are two processes, if you will, that can happen under the change request. One of those is to request a supplemental agreement. And as you see here, it says this is for funding, a scope change, or adding a phase of work that wasn't previously requested or eligible for reimbursement. That's one of the processes that you can do under the change request. The second one is for requesting the authorization for funding on any one of the phases of your project. So as you say, the local government will submit a change request to authorize their funding. And when the local programs office, our group, when we see it, that you have submitted it, we'll ask you for certain documents. And then the system, once you have everything that you're supposed to, in order to request that funding, we'll make certain selections within the system, and you'll receive an email notification that you'll be ready to submit a request for your funding, for your right-of-way or your construction funding. So we'll help you along the way with that also. Next slide, please. So of course, you can also submit reimbursement claims. Once your funding is authorized, this also allows the local government agency to submit a reimbursement request. Or reimbursement requests will be submitted through the EBS portal, and you'll submit it under a new reimbursement claim. And just to note, you can only put in one claim at a time. So if you know you're going to have a couple of months worth of claims, you can group them together, or if you want to wait for one to clear and first, you could do that too, but you can only put one in at a time. And then it has to go through that complete approval process before you can submit the next one. And also the portal will not allow you to submit a change request while you have a reimbursement claim in the portal at the same time. So if you are submitting a regular PE invoice and you already, and you're ready to request right away, you'll have to do some planning or call us if you're not sure about which should be submitted first or what you must do. You can contact us and we can work together to find the best outcome for getting your claim in or your change request, whatever that might be. So you can flip to the next slide, please. So Marta Matthew is now going to present an overview of the local administered projects. And so I'll give it over to her now.
All right, thank you, Madeline. Yes, this is Marta Matthews, Local Programs Manager in Raleigh. And, this is a very brief overview of the whole project delivery process. I'm going to start off talking about the agreement and professional services, and then I'm going to turn it over to McCrae and Keith at the division office to kind of walk through some more of the detailed steps of project delivery. So again, very high level overview. We're going to talk about some resources that are available for you, but this is really, if you're new to federal aid project delivery, if this is all new to you, this is to help you understand what to expect if you get awarded funding and to kind of build in build this into your budget, into your schedule, all the reviews you're going to have to go through, the hoops you're going to have to jump through because this is federal funding. So we just want to give you this heads up before you get too involved in it. All right, next slide. So federal aid funding is cost reimbursement. You do the work and then you come back and request reimbursement from the department. Usually the reimbursement rate is 80%, but that will be dependent on how the MPO approves the funding and your local cost share. Funding authorization is required prior to each phase of work. We must have that authorization before you start on that work. Or cost incurred prior to funding authorization is not eligible for reimbursement. The local government is responsible for delivering the project. The municipal agreement that we put together will lay out all the steps that you have to follow, but you are the sponsor, you're the driver here for project delivery. And DOT's role is to provide oversight and to help you go through the process. We want to make sure that we can reimburse you, so we're going to be kind of keeping a close eye on you, and that's our responsibility that is delegated from federal highways to the state. Next slide. So this is an ideal time to talk about this because y'all are putting together your project ideas. So be thinking about these things as you put together your applications. And most importantly, sort of do your due diligence, look for any potential environmental concerns or right-of-way issues. Utilities, that's a big issue. People don't realize what utilities are out there and you don't plan for it in your budget or even your schedule, and that can really impact a lot of projects. So just be thinking, and as you listen to this presentation, be thinking about all these things that could impact your budget and your schedule. We highly encourage you to work with your division office, share your project ideas with them, make sure it's going to be affecting, any kind of DOT roadway, that they're aware of it and they, agree with what you're doing. We're your partners. We want to help you be successful, and the best way to do that is to pick good projects on the front end. And then just identify your funding source. And in this case, you're going to the MPO for the DA funding. You all may have competed previously or compete in the future for funding that is prioritized, that the spot process that DOT runs. There is TAP funding, plain old TAP funding, not the DA funding, that's available through that process. So there's kind of different funding entities out there. And just understand what that whole process is for approving and allocating funds. All right, so we do have some resources. This is our website, and Beth Madeline and I have this website in our signature on our email. So if you just go find an email from us, and you can find this link. As you look through the website, you can go to the next slide. We have forms and template letters on the right-hand side. We have our handbook, which we do updates to, but you can kind of click through there and see the different sections of the handbook. So this is a good resource to keep available. All right, next slide. We want to kind of doing a little bit of different graphic than John had. We're going up the mountain instead of going down, but it is a process going through project delivery. So I kind of show this to give you an idea of the overall process. This is kind of the first half of project delivery, your pre-construction steps. Everything in blue is a required deliverable before you can move to authorization. So for example, starting at the bottom, you get the project programmed, and then you have to have an agreement fully executed by the department and the local before we can authorize PE funds. But once you authorize your PE funds, you move into procuring professional services, you get an environmental document done, you do your right-of-way plans, and then you can move into right-of-way authorization. And then it continues on up. And then on the next slide, once you have your deliverables for that, you can ask for construction authorization, and that leads you into bidding, letting, and awarding a construction contract, the actual construction, finally, final inspection, project acceptance, and closeout. And your final voucher date is the date that Federal Highways closes out the project in their system. So that's sort of our ultimate goal to get to that point. But it is pretty lengthy process, and a lot more goes on than just these steps that well, we've shown here. But let's just start off, and again, high level overview of everything that will be happening. So you can go to the next slide. So the programming that, and John mentioned this will come after the MPO goes through their selection process, and we'll program the project into the MTIP and then the state transportation improvement program. And the MPO takes the lead on this and gets the project into the STIP. The programming will include the very brief scope of work, the type of funding that's been programmed, the amount of funding, and the federal fiscal year that the project has been programmed in. And that will kind of affect, that's based on your project delivery schedule. So let's look at an example on the next slide. So basically, the STIP will show your ID number, which we call the STIP number. And for example, this one is EB5932. A brief description of the project usually says what locality the project is in. And then it shows you a graph or a grid with the funding source on the left, and then each phase where the funding is programmed. So we've got PE funding, we've got funding for right-of-way, and we've got funding for construction, and they are in sequential years. So the federal fiscal year is what we're looking at in this example, which means the funding must be authorized within that federal fiscal year. So I know John said you're planning on, right now you're doing your call for projects for 27 and 28. So it'll be a little bit further out, but it'll look like this. And this is kind of how your project will be programmed in the STIP. All right, so once your project is programmed, you can request the municipal agreement which is executed between DOT and the local government agency. The agreement's about 22 pages long. It pretty much lists all the provisions that you have to comply with in order to receive reimbursement. It will include the funding amounts, the timeframes for the project, the scope of work, and of course, all the responsibilities. We cannot authorize any funds until we get that agreement signed. So that's sort of really the first piece in the whole process. So funding authorization, we need funding authorized for every phase that is eligible for reimbursement. You may decide to come in and only ask for construction funds for your project. So if the town is paying for the PE funds, the preliminary engineering, right-of-way cost on your own, then you don't have to get funding authorized. But if you want to be reimbursed for any of those phases, we have to have funding authorized. We break down the funding into 3 phases. PE basically pays for your engineering services, the design, the environmental document. Right-of-way is specifically for right-of-way acquisition and or utility relocation. And then construction is all the construction activities, including the construction engineering and inspection and the contract administration. So we make authorizations for those 3 phases if they are eligible to be reimbursed. The authorization is based on an estimate. As you are ready to start that phase of work, you'll give us an estimate for that phase. We request it to federal highways, and this is a little bit out of date. It's really taking probably closer to 4 weeks to get approval, and sometimes longer. There are some more checks that are going into the process, so we are finding that it is taking usually a month to get this funding authorization approved. So kind of make sure you're prepared for that in your schedule. On the other hand, we also don't want you to make authorization requests until you're ready to begin work. One of the things that happens when funding is authorized from federal highways is it starts a clock on their end. And once they see the funding authorized, their expectation is you're ready to start work. And I think we talk about this a little bit further on, but if you don't request reimbursement, if you've gotten your funds authorized and then something holds you up, or you're delayed, whatever happens, and you don't ask for reimbursement from DOT, then we can't ask for reimbursement from federal highways. And that's how federal highways sees activities. If they're paying out money, they know the project is active. But if you're not asking for us for reimbursement, we can't go to them for reimbursement. So just be mindful of the timing of your authorizations. You have to have certain things in place before you can request authorization, and you can't do work until you have that authorization. But once you have the authorization, make sure you proceed in a timely manner. All right, and then I think this is it for my section and Madeline's section. I think we're turning it over to McCray and Keith, Beefy. So any questions on this first little part that y'all might have? All right, well, I'm sure there'll be time at the end to ask questions, but I think I'll turn it over to, or no, wait, I'm sorry. Keep going. Could you go one more slide? I'm sorry. Okay, I think I have to do a few more slides. McCray, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to tell you were on board yet. All right, so can we get to the next slide? Okay, keep going. Okay, here we are. So the first part after we get an agreement in place is PE funding authorization. And this is if PE is an eligible phase of work. So, we'll have the agreement executed. You'll have an estimate for your PE phase. you'll submit that into the portal, and that will be kind of the beginning of how of your process of onboarding a professional engineering firm. All right, so let's look at the next slide to talk about professional services. This is a really critical part, especially if y'all are going out and hiring a firm. You need to make sure that you follow qualifications-based selection procedures. This is in compliance with all the federal regulations, state statutes, and NCDOT policy. Your consultant must be pre-qualified by DOT to do the work that you are advertising for. We have a standard template that we ask that you use for the request for letters of interest. We have all the form letters on our website. So you're kind of just following the DOT process in onboarding a firm. And this is something that is checked. We get requests from the state auditor about this all the time. They're always asking us if we're paying a local government, they want to know, did you review it? Did you concur with it? Did you review the costs? This is something we really are very critical about, keeping all the records and the paperwork on this, and to make sure that you've done this correctly. So next slide. So the process is basically you solicit for services using our template that we've reviewed. You select the most qualified firm and you send that to DOT for a concurrence. So that's sort of your first step. Once we concur in the selection, you develop the scope and negotiate the cost proposal. That gets sent to DOT for review. Most of the time, the division office is reviewing the scope, the mandates, the level of work and the level of effort to make sure it's reasonable with the project. And then our external audit unit is looking at the rates, the overhead rates, the cost of capital, all those numbers. Then we concur with an amount. You send us a draft contract, we review that, and then once we're good, you execute the contract, and then you can give your consultant a notice to proceed. If anything changes as far as that scope with a consultant and you need to add more work, you need to bring it back to DOT and have us review it. So it's, like I said, this is kind of one of the pieces that is all we really keep close track of all this documentation and make sure you follow this process so we can share that with others that might need to see it down the road. Okay, so now I think I'm turning it over to McCray. So thank you.
Thanks, Marta. I do just want to point out that you've heard from Marta and Madeline both, and they're a tremendous resource and are very willing to step in and help guide that process. So I just want to throw that out there for everybody as well. But, now I'll jump into the presentation here. But, as this is federal funding, we would expect this to meet NEPA requirements. And any other federal environmental laws. So what we typically see on these local projects is they are typically category exclusion documents would be the environmental document that we would see associated with the project. So you can move forward. Looking, there is guidance on the local programs website that Marta alluded to earlier. There is a CE checklist that's available. It talks about the different types of ground disturbance. It's also got guidance on who to consult with in that process. Be sure as you're going through there and selecting the qualified firm that this is folks that specialize in environmental documentation. We can certainly assist with that as you move through the process. The documents are typically reviewed and approved locally by the division office. What we found is certainly coordinate ahead of time. Let us know that you're working on the CE document. Include the division personnel on there. And we have an environmental officer that can be at the table with us as we're having those conversations. That seems to help expedite the process. As we talk about the design, certainly with the federal funds coming through DOT, we are looking to call to meet all NCDOT standards
I hope I fixed that.
for the roadway. So any, we'd expect the DOT standard details to be used, particularly, some examples of those wheelchair ramps, curb and gutter, things like that. And I know there have been a lot of eyes on the wheelchair ramp and ADA compliant issues in our area recently. So just be aware of that. The plan should be submitted to the portal at the 30, 60, 90%, and then at the 100% for final review. Be sure as you're submitting these that in your schedule that you are providing time for DOT to review these plans. And typically it's taking probably 3 to 4 weeks to go through that review process. So as you build that schedule and develop that with yourself, and be sure you build that in. And in some certain situations, the divisions can review those plans internally, but a lot does go to Raleigh for that review. Right away, just like on any project, is the biggest unknown out there when we're working on the local projects. There's any kind of right of way, whether it be an easement, temporary permanent drainage easement, or temporary construction easement, it's got to be acquired. We got to go through the federal process there. We'd be looking to enter into any agreements, and any encroachments must be properly documented, certified. The right of way is an eligible expense, or if it's an eligible expense, right of way plans will need to be submitted to the division for review. We'll have our division team review that. We need to see what property is identified, which is going to be what property will be required, and that would include any of those temporary easements we talked about. Then once we review it and our division right of way agent approves those plans, then we would issue y'all a location design approval memo or approval from the approving the right of way plans and allow you to move forward. Again, here's the mountain that we're trying to climb to get through. We've talked about these processes, and we're going to continue as we move forward from pre-construction. So we talked about the funding authorization, and again, just each step of the way, we have to acquire that funding authorization prior to moving forward. And right of ways, no, it falls under that same criteria. And that would, when you get ready, get the right of way plans approved, before you start having conversations with the property owners, we've got to get that approval authorized. That begins in the portal. That would be submitted through the local project system. We would require an execute agreement at that phase as well. You'd be looking at all the approved environmental documents, any cost estimates of the right of way submitted for. These estimates can be developed from tax values, comparable sales, and also any utilities are eligible. Estimate for utility costs should be submitted through that portal as well. So we're aware of the actual need authorized. And with any federal funds and acquisition of right of way, it does have to be in conformance with the Uniform Act, whether it's right of way acquisition, or really whether or not the local government is going out and acquiring the right of way itself, as it's part of the overall project, it would be required to meet the Uniform Act. Appraisal must be reviewed by DOT, and even if the right of way is not an eligible expense through the project, and DOT would provide a concurrence and just compensation for the project overall. The goal would be how the utilities relocate ahead of any construction, during the pre-construction phase. We know that's not always the case, and there can be cases that the relocation of those utilities take place during construction. That's just conversations we need to have with the division staff on the particular project. as we're moving forward and we're looking to get various certifications towards the funding authorization, there's some other certifications that's needed. And, you know, we want to make sure that we have legal rights to all the properties along the project. And essentially, if the right of way is clear, any obstruction or coordination happen. You know, we need to know if the local government owns the property outright or has easement or really any other legal mechanism to utilize that property. You know, looking at any of the utilities, you know, we want to make sure that the utilities have been relocated or there's a plan for those relocations as we move forward. And we would be asking for the local government to provide the utility certification on that. Same thing with railroad, if any project or crossing the railroad, you know, that coordination needs to happen during the design phase and have the coordination about the project. So, you know, we would be looking for that railroad certification to be provided by the local government as well. All those items are submitted to the division staff. Division staff would work with the division right-of-way agent for the right-of-way certification as well. And is there any questions on the right-of-way process? All right. We went from the really through the design phase and the right-of-way phase, and now we're talking a little bit about the proposal and the estimate. So, you know, the contract proposal needs to be prepared in accordance with DOT standard specifications. The latest edition, 2008 edition. You know, the proposal will need to include all the federal provisions necessary. Engineering estimate need to be provided so we can review that, and it needs to reference the spec book or any other special provisions that may not be in the spec book. Those will need to be reviewed and approved. And also, you know, part of the process would be to establish goals for expanded business enterprises. So DBE goals are established on projects within the divisions, and the divisions are more than glad to assist with that process and with those goal setting. And again, I'm in that mountain as we move forward through the process. So, Don, you can advance. I'm going to dive into the construction process here. No, you're fine. You can move forward. So, you know, the items that are needed to get that construction authorization, and we've got to have the construction authorization before we advertise the project. So, you know, those are the environmental documents. C we talked about. Any right-of-way, utility, railroad certifications are needed. You know, we need to have the plans finalized with the specifications of those and the engineering estimate and the contract proposal. So, you know, we would submit all those would be submitted to the portal, you know, to request that construction funding. You know, we request the authorization to FHWA, and again, Marta mentioned earlier, what we're seeing now in 2 weeks, it's taking about 4 weeks in that process. Once that funding is authorized, we will notify the local government in writing, have it authorized, and she can move forward with advertising the contract. So, you know, looking at the construction procurement, you know, we can only advertise the construction project after construction funds are authorized. So that's very important. We wouldn't want to jeopardize that federal funding by ahead of the advertising date and missing that opportunity. But you know, again, DOT will review and concur with the proposal to award the contract once the bids are open. So once the bids are open, you know, we look for the local government to review those and make the determination to accept the bids. Then the accepted bidder would be submitted to the department for review. And you know, certainly we're looking at the lowest bid, lowest competent bidder. So you know, again, we do have template letters that are available when we're requesting those concurrences. So talking about the actual construction, went through the design, right of way acquisition, utilities, and actually advertised the contract at the point. So, you know, the construction administration, engineering inspection is typically accomplished by the local government. Again, you know, utilizing the resources through DOT's construction manual or the local division office, resident engineer's office. DOT will provide that oversight, the construction oversight to the division office or the resident engineer's office. In our case, in Division 13, we utilize the resident engineer's office to be there periodically through the construction process. Again, DOT must concur once the local government accepted the project before a final reimbursement can be made. And, you know, there's a lot of items that go with that as we get through the process, we can certainly coordinate together. So looking at the reimbursement, you know, this can occur throughout the project as costs are incurred. So, you know, once y'all have an invoice from, you know, whatever phase it may be, whether that be through the design, right of way, or construction, you know, once you make a payment, those invoices can be submitted through the portal to DOT, and then DOT will reimburse 80% of the eligible costs up to the amount in the agreement. Again, final reimbursement will not occur until the project is completed, it's accepted by DOT, and all reporting and other requirements have been accomplished. So that's an important factor as well. For the closeout of the project final voucher date, the department will process several items as it relates to closing out these projects. We want to make sure that the local government has obtained and plans to hold on to the appropriate records. You know, looking at the cost that the local government owes the department, if any, again, that would be based on the agreement. And certainly look at certifying any materials incorporated in the project so that there's a certification form that's necessary there. A lot of times we see the local governments working closely with the department through that process. One thing to keep in mind as well, you know, in that statement it talked about calculating any costs local government owes the department. In the agreement, it typically lays out that the department reserves 10% of the project costs for services, and those can include the plan review, you know, staff time associated with that, and also keep that in mind as well. And I would encourage everybody to reach out, because it's not just the total construction cost. So there is review, there is time spent from DOT staff on the project. So, but again, once these items are accomplished, DOT will request the federal highways to close out the project and issue that final voucher date. So once that final voucher date, it starts the retention of the record period. So just to recap some of the important things, you know, we're going to dive in, and you can go ahead and advance. You know, the biggest thing is to make sure as you're moving through the project ideas, and I know with the MPO out for the call for project, you want to make sure that you've really dove in here and looked at what challenges is going to be there, you know, what right of way is available or not available, what right of way you'll have to acquire, any utilities, utility relocations are not cheap. You know, and certainly consider whether that be overhead or underground utilities, wet utilities, any environmental situations that may come up. And you know, in the mountains, we do have all kinds with the wetland streams, floodplains. We have a lot of endangered species even in the area. So a lot of things to really look at there. And you know, again, look at your schedule and look at that from a realistic standpoint, knowing that there's going to be the reviews from the department, there's going to be time that's needed to really get the funding authorization and move the project forward. And you know, I look at the overall budget of the project, knowing that this funding is going to be available in that 27-28 time frame. make sure that that's accounted for when you're doing the estimate. I mean, because today's dollar is not going to buy you the same project as in 2027. Be mindful of that. When it comes to professional services, the prime and any subs need to be pre-qualified by DOT to do work, and they do have to be qualified for work code, where the subs can be pre-qualified in those work codes. So there is a list of work codes available. We'll be glad to point y'all to those on the website that Marta mentioned earlier. Take into account the time it does take to onboard a consultant with DOT, because the local government team will be reviewing that, be requesting the mandates. That'll get kicked over to DOT. We'll review it. So there is a time frame there, and we're not talking weeks. We're talking months to get that process through. And this is your contract. This would be the contract the local government has with the consultant or the contractor. So we're there to assist, but ultimately the contract's between the local government and the consultant. And the funding authorization, we've talked about that a lot today. I mean, it's extremely important to make sure that these funds are authorized prior to spending any money. So, no cost can occur prior to that authorization. And depending on the phase, but certain deliverables are required before we can request that funding authorization. Once funding is available, it's very important to move quickly. Marta mentioned that the clock start ticking from the federal highway endpoint, so we don't want to be coming up and be coming up on that end date there, but certainly important to push the project as quickly as possible. Again, if the project is federally funded, it must meet the Uniform Act. Even if you're not receiving reimbursement from for the right-of-way phase. So if you have got funding in construction or funding design, every aspect of that project has to meet the Uniform Act, has to meet federal requirements. The acquisition of the right-of-way always takes longer than you think. So just be sure as you're building those timelines in, you are considering those factors. The contract bid proposals again must meet NCDOT standard specifications. If DOT doesn't have a standard, then special provisions to be written, but that will be in the contract documents to be reviewed by DOT and approved. Certainly be familiar with DOT's construction manual, and if there is anything the divisions can do to assist with that, certainly reach out. We'll be glad to point you in the right direction, point you to the right resource to make that happen. So, through the closeout process, just be aware of the cost the local government may need to reimburse DOT. We talked a little bit about that. DOT will have expenses on these local projects. So keep that in mind when you're developing your budget. Keep all the records in a safe place for any future audits, and that with the federal funds, a reality that will take place at some point. There'll be an audit take place on the project. Keep that in mind. But with that, does anyone have any questions on this process? All right, Tammy, I think I'll turn it over to you.
All right. There's a lot of good information there. We can go ahead and go to the next screen. So I just want to talk to you about roles, what everybody's roles and responsibility is. So FHWA's roles in local projects is to provide federal funding for your project, to ensure that our federal dollars are spent appropriately, to ensure that there is no fraud, waste, or abuse, to ensure that the recipient or subrecipient in this case has a good project, and to ensure that the recipient or subrecipient has every opportunity to keep every dollar of their federal funds. I just want to mention that we are not, like I've said this before, but if anybody's new on here, we're not out to get you or anything like that. Everybody's intention is for everybody to keep their money and to have a good project. When that doesn't happen, you know, we don't feel good about it. We feel like we failed in you know, a certain way. So it's certainly not, you know, anything that we're trying to ding you on or anything like that. We're just trying to make sure everybody has a good project and gets to keep all of their money. So just wanted to mention that. Next. So NCDOT's role. So as you know, NCDOT usually doesn't have any funds in an LPA project, but they do have full oversight of these projects. So it's a little bit different. So in the very unlikely event, if funds have to be repaid for some reason or deemed non-participating, they're taken from our office, they're taken from NCDOT, and then the municipality will be responsible for paying NCDOT back. So it's a reimbursement policy. Next. So some of the common terms that you may hear along the process, and I know Marta has already used some, but there's contract authority from US Congress. So what they're saying is DOT, you might be able to obligate this amount, this dollar amount. The obligational ceiling or limitation is over and all.
And Tammy, did we lose you, or am I having a connection issue on my end?
It's not just you, Joe.
Okay. Give us a second. We'll resume shortly.
Hey, John, I sent her a text just to make sure she was aware that we couldn't hear her.
Okay, yeah, I think I saw her drop off. So.
Okay, John, she's trying to get back on, but she's having some difficulties.
Okay. Let's give her a little bit of a second. If folks want to take a quick break, let's give it 5 minutes. Stretch your legs or get a drink, whatever folks might need. Let's resume back at 4:23, just to make sure that we can get Tammy back and folks can move about a little bit. I appreciate it. Sorry for the technical issues.
Hey, John.
Mhm.
I just got a text back from her. She can't get back in for some reason. And she asked that if Marta could complete her presentation for her.
Okay. Marta, are you still with us? Let's give her a second in case she just walked away.
She probably just ran into the kitchen.
Hey, John, can you hear me?
Hi, Terry. Yes, we can hear you.
Sorry, I got kicked out. It said something about the 40-minute limit.
Oh, oh no. Okay. It's okay. For a moment, I have been having very strange internet issues for the last month.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Are we on break?
we're on break until
Okay, good.
4:23.
Okay, good.
3 minutes. I got nervous it was on my end, so. I have a nice big blue hard wire running half the length of my house to make
Oh,
sure.
great.
Yeah.
Some days everything works perfectly, and other days this is what happens.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Okay, folks, 1 minute warning. We'll resume in about 1 minute. Okay, Tammy, if you're ready, we can go ahead and resume. So whenever you're
Okay.
good to go.
Sorry about that, everybody. So as I was saying, funds obligated. So those are your authorizations, your PE right away or construction authorizations. And you want to get those obligated as soon as you're ready for that phase of work. The reason we want to get that obligated is so the bottom issue there doesn't happen. Basically, when funds are obligated, they are protected. Any funds that are not obligated can be rescinded by Congress, and that happened several years ago. And we don't ever want that to happen again. So we want to stay on schedule, and we want to make sure you guys get your funds obligated as soon as you are ready to go. Next slide. So the super circular is it established a period of performance. Basically what that is a start and an end date. for projects. The start date is your authorization date from Federal Highway Administration. And then the end date is the date that you can no longer charge to that project. There's a formula that DOT has come up with that gives ample time for project end dates to be closed out. But it is something that you want to be mindful of to make sure, you know, you're not bumping up against that end date and you're able to get all of your billings in and paid. Next. So as I mentioned, the project authorizations, there are 3: preliminary engineering, right-of-way, and construction. And then just as a reminder, authorization is required prior to incurring any expenses. So make sure you have your project authorized by us before you incur any expenses, because any work done, you know, prior to our authorization date is not eligible. So just be reminded of that. And then I'll talk a little bit about inactive projects. In the municipal agreement, it's going to say that you need to at least bill your project, send in a billing for your project once every 6 months. That's going to keep it off of the inactive list. I know if there's like small sidewalks and things like that in the past, some people have only wanted to bill one time. And sure enough, there's, you know, there can be a problem or whatever that it extends, you know, for some reason past that 6 months, and it shows up on the inactive list. What that means is if a project is on our inactive list for a year, then to Congress, that means that you don't need that money. You haven't spent anything on it, so you don't need it, and so they can take it back. So we want to do everything we can to get your billings in on time. You can work that out with the division, with McCray and them, you know, and make sure you get your billings in on time. So then usually in normal years, and I'm not sure we'll ever go back to a normal year. You can go ahead and go forward, John. I have done random reviews. I will be coming out. I'm not sure where I'll be coming out this year, in the next few months. Back up one, John, sorry. Yeah, so when I do a review, these are normally the items that I look at, I check. I know that DOT probably looks at these also. I do have a checklist that I use that is, and it's an open book test. If anybody would like that checklist, it is kind of my personal checklist for the office, but I will certainly be glad to share it with you. And these are the items that I review when I come out to look at your project, to look at your project records. And I'm pretty sure DOT looks at all of these items too. So I'll just throw that out there. And then, so you can go to the next slide. The preliminary project reviews, I also want to be invited to the pre-construction meetings that you guys have. And I think the letter that McCray will probably share with you, you know, it's a sample letter. It has my name on it, as well as Sam Frederick from Materials and Test. We would like to be invited to the pre-construction conference. We don't necessarily attend all of them, but we try to attend some. And the pre-construction conference, the more people you can get to attend, the better, because that's where you can iron out, you know, and hash out a lot of the areas that, you know, may be an issue, and really talk about things before the project starts, before it gets too deep, and you can get some things worked out there. And then, like I was talking about on the previous slide, the records reviews, I usually try to pick a project that's 50 to 75% complete. So I'll have, you know, records to look at. And if I select one of your projects, it's going to be random. It's not because you've done anything wrong. But I'll give you plenty of notice. I'll coordinate that through the division and let you guys know when I'll be coming out, so you can have records in the office and everything. Next slide. Excuse me. So this is really kind of at the end of the project. And I realize that you guys are not even kind of at the beginning of the project yet, but just some things to remember. Material certification is very, very important for local projects. Getting those projects closed out. Just because your project is open to the public, it doesn't mean it's closed out. You probably still have a good 9 months to a year before we can get that closed out in our system. So just make sure you're following, everything that the division is telling you, you need to do in your punch list items and your final inspection, and getting the appropriate documentation in so we can get those projects closed. The super circular also says that if a project is not closed out within 15 months of the end date, that FHWA can take all of the project funds back. So we're not going to let that happen either. I just wanted to let you kind of know about the timeframes and everything, and we just need to stay on schedule. I know we tend to do a really good job beforehand, and then it seems like on some projects the wheels kind of fall off at the end, and we're scrounging around trying to get the project to close out and everything. So I just want to remind you guys of all of those dates. Next, records retention. So once the project is ready to be closed out, everything is done and in, DOT will send it over electronically for us to sign. It's called a final voucher in our system, in our tracking system, which is called FMIS. The final voucher date is assigned to the project once it's closed. The NCDOT division will send a municipality a letter letting you know what your final voucher date is. You need to keep all project records for 3 years after the final date. Those projects can be audited by FHWA. I've personally never done that, but that's not to say that Washington office hasn't ever had a complaint filed, directly to them, and then we had to go back and ask some questions about a project, a year or two later. So just make sure you keep all of your project records for 3 years from your final voucher date. And if you have any questions or run into any problems, don't know how to handle something, please reach out to the division, to Marta, to Madeline, to me. If none of those can answer your questions, we're here to help you. I know the old cliche, I'm from the government and I'm here to help you. I really mean that. We are here to help you. These are all our projects. So, the quicker we can get something resolved, it's better for everybody. So if you have any issues, please reach out to DOT, or, and if they need to contact me, they certainly will. And I will mention to you at this time that I have submitted my retirement papers. So I will be around until May 31st. So if you have anything that needs my attention before then, just talk to Marta or McCrae or whoever, and they will include me if needed. But it's been really, really nice working for everybody. I'm going to miss you all. Any questions?
Thanks, Tammy. And we certainly are going to miss Tammy when she's retired. It's a big blow to our agency. She's been around since she was a kid. So it's really going to be tough. Again, I'm Mike Dawson. I'm the Realty Officer with the Federal Highway Administration, North Carolina Division. And I just want to give you kind of a 30,000-foot overview of our role in the acquisition of right-of-way for your project. And specifically focusing on the Uniform Act and how that can impact your project. Okay, next slide, John. So there's some outcomes from my presentation that you should be able to grasp once we're done. You'll be able to identify the rights conveyed in the 5th and the 14th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution. You'll be able to state the purpose of the Uniform Act. You'll explain who must follow the Uniform Act, and you'll understand when Uniform Act requirements must be followed. Okay, John, next slide. Okay, if there's one thing that you take away from this presentation, this is it. When you're using federal funds, there are strings attached. So what's the catch? Next slide, John. If you don't comply with the law, including the Uniform Act, it means that you do not get to use federal dollars in your project. I can't express how important that is, especially in the right-of-way program. There are a lot of areas that it is easy to mess up, especially if you're not experienced in dealing with federal right-of-way. So you want to make sure that you've got all your ducks in a row. And I would suggest very strongly that if your organization does not have experience in acquiring right-of-way under federal regulations, that you consult with our partners at the North Carolina Department of Transportation and consider hiring a right-of-way consultant from their approved list. That pretty much guarantees that your project is going to move smoothly, because you'll be working with someone who's got experience, not only working with Federal Highway Administration, but also working with NCDOT. So I would strongly consider that. Next slide, John. So let's talk a little bit about eminent domain. Eminent domain is the power of any sovereign government to take private property without the consent of the owner. And that is kind of the basis of what the whole right-of-way process is about. Next slide, John. And eminent domain comes directly from the United States Constitution. And it's kind of cool to think that, hey, my job is actually mentioned twice in the US Constitution. First, in the Fifth Amendment, where it says, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. And also in the 14th Amendment, which says, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without the due process of law. Next slide, John. So the legal authority to acquire property starts with the Constitution, and it works down to the state through the state constitution, and then it's enacted through state laws. And then your go-to guide is going to be the North Carolina DOT right-of-way manual. The right-of-way manual is approved by Federal Highway Administration for the state. So as long as you're following that manual, everything is going to be good. Next slide, John. So the Uniform Act, the full name of the Uniform Act is the Uniform Relocation Assistance and Real Property Acquisition Policies Act of 1970 as amended. It's also Public Law 91-646. That's a mouthful, so we normally just say Uniform Act or URA. Next slide, John. So where can you find the law and the rules that carry out the law? Well, the law is codified in 42 USC 4601. USC stands for United States Code. That's the law. And of course, to enact the law, to tell us what we do with that law and to make it work, we have regulations. And those regulations are in 49 CFR Part 24. CFR stands for the Code of Federal Regulations. And on the previous slide, you saw a copy of that Code of Federal Regulations. If you want to take a look at this, you are welcome to at any time through a really great website called ecfr.gov. That stands for Electronic Code of Federal Regulations. There's the website for it, a web address right there. And if you really get bored or can't sleep some night, it's got every single entry from every agency in the United States government and how they operate. So it's big. Okay, next slide. So the Uniform Act has a twofold purpose. It's to establish uniform and equitable land acquisition policies for federal and federally assisted programs, and also to ensure the uniform and equitable treatment of persons displaced from their homes, businesses, or farms by federal and federally assisted projects. So the big things here are it's uniform, it's equitable, it applies to acquisition policies, and it also applies to relocation of individuals impacted by our program. Next slide. So who has to follow the Uniform Act? Well, any federal department or agency in the executive branch. I believe there's a total of 18 agencies that under our purview. Any department or agency of a state or a political subdivision of a state, or any entity with the authority to acquire property by eminent domain under federal or state law. Next slide, John. So when must an agency follow the Uniform Act? Want to click on that, John? When any phase of the project is federally funded. That is so important right there. When any phase of the project is federally funded. if there's $1 of federal aid money in your construction, then your agency must follow the Uniform Act if you're going to acquire right-of-way. Even if you're not using federal money to acquire that right-of-way, you still need to follow the Uniform Act. So of course, it's when real property is acquired. And next, there we go. And then when there's property owners or tenants who are going to be acquired or displaced as a direct result of a federal aid project. Next slide, John. So the basic requirements of 49 CFR Part 24, also known as the Uniform Act, are to appraise the fair market value of property to be acquired, for the agency to review and approve all appraisals, for the agency to determine what the amount of just compensation is, and just compensation can be no less than the fair market value in writing, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's simply an appraisal or what we call a claim report for determining fair market value. There can be other issues involved when finally arriving at what is considered just compensation. And there also, you need to have strict adherence to required notifications. And I won't get into the nitty-gritty of that, but it's again part of the normal process. And it's one of those things that can really throw you off track. Next slide, John. So basic requirements are to negotiate in good faith, avoid litigation if possible, the administration of relocation benefits, the determination of relocation eligibility, to relocate residences, businesses, farms, nonprofits, others, and to provide relocation advisory services to anyone that you actually do end up moving. Let's take a look real quick here at the second bullet there, avoiding, you can go back one, John, avoiding litigation if possible. By all means, you want to try to negotiate settlements with property owners. Once you go to court and use the condemnation process, you completely lose control over what the amount of money that property owner is going to be paid. And I would say that probably 9.9 times out of 10, the property owner is going to be paid more than what you were offered. It doesn't mean the fair market value was wrong. It doesn't mean that the just compensation amount that you determined was wrong. It just means that either a judge or a judge and a jury have decided, hey, they made it this far and we're going to throw some more money at them. So it's pretty rare to go into court and come out with the same amount of money that you walked in with. Why is that important? Well, most of the time, I'm sure if you're acquiring right away, you've got X number of dollars in your budget to acquire that right away. Once you go into a situation where you're in condemnation, you've lost control over that amount of money, and you could end up blowing your whole budget on one simple, or what you thought was going to be a simple acquisition. So you definitely, if possible, you want to stay out of court. Okay, next slide, John. So the federal state partnership, NCDOT is our close partner in all of this. And let's talk a little bit about what each party brings to the table. Federal Highway Administration provides the funding, about 80% in the typical project. We provide compliance oversight, we provide training, we provide technical assistance, and we also provide technical research. So kind of the big ticket 30,000 foot stuff. Next slide. So our partners at NCDOT really do most of the heavy lifting here. They're providing matching funds as well as your local agencies. They are doing all the project development. They're doing all the project design review. They're doing project delivery, and they're doing project oversight. So they have got, their hands are definitely in all of these projects. Next slide, please. So quick review. What rights do the 5th and 14th Amendments convey? And I'm not going to ask you to get on and say that, but you understand that it is, we're talking about just compensation for your property and fair market value. The twofold purpose of the Uniform Act is in your acquisition and your relocation programs, you want to have equitable and fair treatment of everybody. Who has to follow the Uniform Act? Pretty much any agency that is using federal dollars. When does that agency have to follow the Uniform Act? Anytime that there is a single dollar of federal aid money in your project. Please, please, please remember that. $1 of federal aid anywhere in your project federalizes your entire project, and it kicks the Uniform Act in for all of your acquisition. And what do you risk if there's non-compliance? Well, you risk losing your federal funds. And we don't want to see that. As Tammy said, our job is to make sure you get to spend every legitimate penny that you get from the federal government. And we don't work on commission. We don't get extra money if we pull money back from you. We basically get yelled at by our boss and ask, what was the problem? What was the issue? And why didn't you check it or catch it ahead of time? And most of the time we're good at doing that. Sometimes there are things that we just miss and we can't fix, but that's pretty rare. So again, we want to make sure you get to spend every penny on your project. And our goal is to make sure that you have a great project. It's great for us, it's great for you, it's great for the state of North Carolina. So next slide, John. So any questions for me, please feel free to ask. And hearing none, last slide. Here's my contact information. Again, if you have any questions about the program, I know it's really complex. The first place you want to go to is your NCDOT right-of-way personnel. And for most of you, that is going to be Bobby Haskett in Division 13. Oh great, I'm drawing a Frankie Dills in Division 14. But if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to shoot me an email or give me a call. I would rather answer your question well in advance of any issue. I'm not going to ding you for it. Our goal is, to work with you and make sure that you get your project delivered on time, on budget, and on the ground. Great, thank you all very much.
Okay, folks, thanks for staying with us thus far, and congratulations, Tammy. Hope you'll enjoy retirement, and I'll definitely remember that. I want to open it up to anybody else who might have questions or would like to ask anybody any additional items, because I know that questions at 4:45 are better than those at 5:01. So does anybody have any questions that they would like to know or ask? And if anybody has anything that they can think of, I understand that a lot of the information, it's I won't even say it's like trying to drink out of a fire hose. This is standing under a lot of the Niagara Falls trying to get a sip. It's a lot that comes at folks pretty fast. And there's actually a lot more kind of small little details that if you need to ask, feel free to reach out. I think that was one of the big common items for a lot of the presentations and information today. Ask questions early and often. So last call, and again, if you need something, you can always email me as well at john@landisguide.org. But yeah, feel free to follow up. I'll give folks a couple more minutes to ask anything that they might need or follow up with, and then I'll end the presentation. Hearing none, thank you for joining us and have a wonderful Wednesday evening. Take care.
Thanks, John. Congratulations, Tammy. We'll miss you.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, thank you, John. Appreciate it.
Thank you all.